Hey, what is up guys, Mergaman4 here, and today I'm going to be bringing you my second video on the 13th Doctor, and well, it's pretty obvious that the decision to cast a woman as the next Doctor has been pretty controversial amongst a lot of the fans. Me personally, I fall on the side where I'm not the biggest fan of this decision, and this video is me going to be explaining why. Now the first thing that I want to make very clear is that I'm not outright against the female Doctor necessarily. It's more the idea of the Doctor changing genders, which when you look at it on the surface appears to be the same thing, but it actually has some very different subtext. And I've been posting a lot of comments to different social media, places like Reddit and stuff like that, to voice my opinion. And people take "I don't want a female Doctor" to mean I don't want a female Doctor because I don't want a female playing the Doctor, which isn't really the case. I mean, yes, it's the case because of the situation that we're in, but it's not because she's a female that I'm against a female playing the Doctor. So people just kind of make assumptions and they don't give you the chance to kind of explain why you feel that way. And of course there are plenty of people that really are being sexist and misogynistic about it and are being absolutely ridiculous, saying that they're going to quit the show or the Doctor Who is ruined. That is absolutely ridiculous. But there are also people who don't agree with the female Doctor that do have some more reasonable arguments, you know, stuff that actually makes sense, legitimate concerns to have about this, or just, you know, in general they just don't really like the idea, and that's okay. But a lot of people who support there being a female Doctor, or just a lot of the population in general, don't seem to be able to accept that you can dislike the idea of a female Doctor without being sexist, and I think that that is also just as ridiculous as some of the people who are quitting the show because of this. However, I'm going to save that kind of stuff for another video. I was originally just going to do my previous video and this one, but I decided to make it a trilogy because that topic as well is something that I'm very passionate about and I really want to talk about as well. This video specifically is my feelings about there being a female Doctor. And as I already said, I'm not the biggest fan of that decision. I'm going to be explaining why. And I also think that it's really important to note, because I also made this mistake in posting to certain places online, I'm not trying to argue why there shouldn't be a female Doctor. I'm not trying to convince other people to be against a female Doctor. That's not my point. That's not my goal. All I want to do is express why I personally am not comfortable with the decision. These are all my opinions. I'm not trying to convince you to feel the same way I am. I'm just telling you how I feel and why I feel that way. And so basically, kind of like what I mentioned a minute ago, I want to be able to express these opinions without being unfairly judged and labeled. Kind of like what people are accusing people like me of doing to Jodie Whittaker, which is not the case. So it's rather ironic, really, but once again, that's for another video. And so, basically, before I go into my reasoning, I just want to say, if you disagree with me, please, please, don't just automatically assume that I'm sexist or misogynistic. Please watch my video, listen to what I have to say, listen to my reasoning, and then, if you think I'm still misogynistic or sexist or anything like that, then please post in the comments that and tell me why you think that's the case. Because I've had people call me sexist and misogynistic for these views before, and when I've asked them why I'm being that way, they haven't responded, or they've given very, very poor responses in return that don't make any sense. So pretty much, if there's going to be a comment on this video about what I have to say, I want it to be logical and actually have a point to it. Don't just call me sexist and leave it at that. Tell me why I'm being that way. And if you have poor reasoning behind it, I'm going to call you out on that, just like I mentioned earlier. But anyways, without further ado, let's get right into the actual reasons. And first things first, like I said before, I'm not so much against the idea of a female Doctor, rather the Doctor changing genders, And this isn't just specific to the Doctor. I was never a big fan of Time Lords being able to change genders. A lot of people are like, oh, well, it's like a lottery. There's like a 50-50 chance of it happening. So it's about time that the Doctor changed into a woman. But I want to dispute that right away. It's nowhere near a 50-50 chance of happening. And that's for two reasons. One, you have the out-of-universe, the real-world reason, in that Time Lords changing gender wasn't even mentioned in the show, and that's not in real life. I know the idea has been bouncing around since the early 80s, but it wasn't mentioned in the show itself until Matt Smith's first scene in The End of Time Part 2, which is about 45 years after the very first regeneration, and then it wasn't made indisputably canon until The Doctor's Wife the next year. And what I mean by that is, even though the Doctor mentioned he might have changed into a girl in The End of Time, you could still argue that it wasn't possible at that point, but once The Doctor's Wife aired and the Doctor mentioned the Corsair, there was zero way that you could argue that Time Lords cannot ever change gender through regeneration. But considering we go that long, a 45-year gap between the first regeneration and the first mention in the show, we can assume that it's a relatively uncommon event. And I'm not saying that it didn't happen, just we didn't see or hear about it. I'm just saying that if it were a common event, you'd think we would have heard about it at some point before then. And the other reason, too, is in-universe. And that is, we have seen numerous Time Lords regenerate into the same gender multiple times in a row within the show until the Stephen Moffat era. We never saw a single Time Lord change gender through regeneration until Missy. We heard about the Corsair, but we didn't see it happen until Missy, and then we definitely saw it on screen with the General. And so, obviously, if we go that long without, once again, seeing or hearing about it, it must be fairly rare. But what a lot of people who have only seen the new series assume is that the Doctor and the Master are the only Time Lords that we've seen regenerate multiple times, but that is not true. We saw 4 incarnations of Barusa in the classic series, and throughout the show's history we've seen 3 incarnations of Rassilon, and of course we've seen 13 incarnations of the Doctor before he changed into a woman, and 7 incarnations of the Master before he changed into a woman, but we know that the Master has been through way more bodies than that. Granted, he also stole a bunch of those bodies, but we know he at least went through 1 full regeneration cycle without being a woman, plus a few more, because in the new series he's not stealing bodies, he's got his regenerations back. So we know that if it were a 50-50 chance, most of these Time Lords, if not all of them, would have changed gender at some point. And then finally we have the General, which we've only seen 2 incarnations, but after he regenerated into her most recent incarnation, love those kinds of sentences, right? She said that she'd only been a man in that one body, and we knew that she was currently in her 12th body. So all of this seems to be very evident that this is a rare occurrence for a Time Lord. If it were a 50-50 chance, we'd definitely have seen multiple of these Time Lords, if not all of them, changing gender at some point. So it's definitely in the canon of the show a rare event, even if it does exist. And of course all of that does point towards the fact that a female Doctor is possible. And yes, I know of course it is possible. I'm not saying that it's not possible for it to happen. Basically what all this is trying to point towards is the fact that it's incredibly convenient and a bit awkward timing, in my opinion. When Missy first appeared, that was okay, like, 'cause as I said, I'm not a huge fan of Time Lords changing gender, but I didn't think it was a big deal when the Master appeared as Missy, because this was the first gender swap we've actually seen. And so, you know, we know it's a rare thing, and because we've never seen it before, that seemed alright. And then we saw it again the next year with the General, which seemed really forced and out of place. And now we're seeing it with the Doctor, which normally wouldn't be as bad of a thing, but because it's following so hot on the heels of these previous 2 gender swaps, to me, and I know this isn't necessarily the case, I don't know what Chibnall's reasoning was, but to me, as a viewer, as a regular viewer who's seen every episode of the show, to me it seems like it's just following the trend, jumping on the bandwagon, rather than an actual bold and unique decision. And I don't know what is going on in Chibnall's mind, but I have a feeling that he would not have cast a female Doctor, at least not as number 13, if Moffat had not previously done at least Missy if maybe even if he hadn't done the general, but I'm sure about Missy. So I think that the timing is just weird to go so long in the show, more than 50 years before we actually see a gender swapping Time Lord, and now we suddenly have 3 within 3 years. That just feels really off. And as a casual viewer, or as someone who's only seen more recent episodes, and even if you've only seen the new series, that doesn't seem that weird. But for someone like me, who's an avid watcher of both the classic and the new series, the timing just feels so odd and awkward to have that many just all clustered together. It's just like this random upsurge in gender swapping Time Lords, and I would have felt a lot more comfortable with it if they had been a bit more spaced apart. As I mentioned before, the general was just stupid and pointless, and Missy wasn't too bad, but now that the Doctor's following hot on their heels, I feel like it would have felt like more natural and more believable, both in real life and in the show's canon, if it had happened 1 or 2 Doctors down the line instead of right now. And that also kind of contributed to my surprise when the 13th Doctor was a woman, because I didn't expect it to happen, because it just didn't feel like the right time to me. It didn't feel proper yet. And so now that I've kind of talked about that kind of branches into a point I have to make about Chibnall and his casting, and that is that he explicitly said that he always intended the 13th Doctor to be a woman. And my issue with that isn't, once again, because she's a woman, but because of the Doctor changing genders. I feel like to specifically cast a female Doctor, that doesn't feel natural to me. It doesn't feel like a natural progression. To me, that feels like we're doing it because we can now, and look, a bunch of other Time Lords have now changed gender, so we should do it for the Doctor, which to me isn't the right reasoning. Obviously, as I said, I don't know what's going on in Chibnall's mind, but from what it appears, that's what it seems like to me. And maybe he did audition male actors as well, I don't know. He didn't say anything about what the audition process was like, but based on his comment about specifically wanting a female Doctor, it would appear that he didn't really pay that much attention to any male actors. And personally, I would feel a lot better about a female Doctor being cast if it had been through gender-blind casting. And so they auditioned both males and females with the equal probability of getting chosen, and they legitimately chose the best actor or actress out of all of them, regardless of gender. Now, it's perfectly possible that Jodie Whittaker was legitimately the best choice, but because he specifically went in looking for a female Doctor, there is a bit of bias there, and we might never know if she really was. And so once again, if it had been through gender-blind casting and they just cast whoever was best regardless of gender, not specifically looking for a certain gender, I would have felt a lot more comfortable with the switch, with the change, because it would have felt a lot more natural to me. And I think that's when the right time would be to cast a female Doctor. It would be the right time if the best person for the role just happened to be a woman, not I want a woman for the job, so we're going to cast a woman. If it was just like, I want whoever's best for the job, and oh look, it's a woman. So I'm not a huge fan of Chibnall specifically searching for a female Doctor. And the other thing I have with it too is he also said that he wasn't going to be casting the new Doctor as a gimmick. And so I know he said that, but once again, to me, it looks on the surface as if that is the case, and I may well be proven wrong, and I hope that I am, but I personally don't really see what a female Doctor could bring to the show that a male Doctor couldn't, that also wouldn't be gimmicky. I mean, I'm not a showrunner, I'm not a writer, so I don't know. Chibnall probably has something in mind, but right now we don't know that, so as it stands right now, it just appears to be a gimmick to me. And so once again, I might be proven wrong, and I'll gladly be proven wrong, but as of right now, I'm not convinced. And the other thing too is, with specifically casting a female Doctor, I just don't really see the need for it. The Doctor's always been a male character, and so a lot of people say, oh, it's about time, why not? But I mean, that's the issue. You shouldn't just cast a female Doctor because you can. Once again, that feeds into the gimmick thing. But also, people give reasonings like, oh, well, it'll give a good role model for women. And I'm like, okay, sure, but we already have other good role models for women. I've seen people talk about Wonder Woman being a good role model for women, and I personally thought that Rey was a great character in The Force Awakens. But I just don't see why the Doctor specifically needs to become that role. And ironically as well, a lot of people that have said that it would be a good female role model have also said, in defense of people saying that we're losing a male role model, they've said that role models shouldn't be gender specific and that either sex can have role models of the opposite sex. So it doesn't really matter which gender they are to be a role model. And so to that I say, then why does it matter if the Doctor's a woman? Because women can have male role models. And so that's not an argument against a female Doctor. That's just kind of a rebuttal to some of the arguments I've seen for a female Doctor, because if you're arguing that they should have a female Doctor because it really doesn't matter which gender for a role model, then that's not really a good argument for a female Doctor specifically, because by extension a male Doctor could have exactly the same reasoning behind it. And so of course that also feeds into representation as well. As I mentioned, there are other great representatives for women in other films and TV shows, and I think that in Doctor Who as well, the companions, there have been many very strong companions in the show that are great representation for females. And so because we have those characters as well, that also feeds into why I think we don't need a female Doctor to have good female representation in the show. I don't think it's necessary, so that's part of the reason why as well I feel like specifically casting a female Doctor doesn't really feel natural to me, because I don't think it's necessary, I don't think it's needed, and so to me, yeah, it just feels weird because of that. And another thing too is because the Doctor has always been a male character, that's how I see him. I see him as a man, and that's where my problem with Time Lords changing gender kind of comes from once again. And it's not Doctor specific. Any Time Lord, I'd feel weird seeing in another gender. I would feel really weird if Romana came back as a man, or Susan came back as a man. That would just be really weird. And the Doctor's a much more extreme case of this, because we see him all the time. He's not just in one short segment of the show like some of these other characters. He's in the show constantly, and we've seen him in pretty much every episode, with a few exceptions in the 60s, for 54 years. And so to have a male character for that long suddenly become female, that's a bit of a drastic change. And so I've talked about in some of my comments and posts elsewhere how I think it would be very strange if you, say, replaced a character like James Bond with another female lead. I know James Bond can't change, but if you replaced James Bond with another female lead with very similar attributes, just he's a female, that would feel strange. And so with the Doctor, that's how it is with me. You're replacing the Doctor with a female lead, and yes, she's going to be, hopefully, she's going to be the same character, but that just still feels strange because it's such a drastic departure from what we're used to. And I've seen a lot of people bring up, well, if you have a problem with the Doctor changing gender, then surely you have a problem with him changing accent or changing age or stuff like that. And I'm like, well, no, because two reasons. One, gender is a lot more of a drastic change than any of the other changes that the Doctor's gone through. And two, he's always gone through these other changes before. I was introduced to the show during the middle of Series 5, so I've only really gone through one regeneration before, and so to me, the Doctor's always been different ages and had different accents and stuff like that, but he's never been a female before, so this is unprecedented for the Doctor. And so that's why, part of the reason why it feels so strange to me, because it's just such a drastic departure from what you're used to. And then people bring up Missy. They say, well, are you forgetting about the Master becoming a woman? And I say, no, because it's a very different situation. Yes, for the entire history of the character, up until he became a she, he was obviously played by a guy, just like the Doctor, but the actual situation itself is very different because of one crucial difference. That is the amount of time on the show, frequency appearing on the show. It's a massive difference. And so I've broken this down into really three categories. There's incarnations, stories, and amount of time on the show as a whole. And so, first off, amount of time on the show, the Master didn't appear until 8 years after the show began. And so already he's got a loss of 8 years on the Doctor. And then it was a gap of 43 years between Master's first appearance and his first gender swap. With the Doctor, it's 54 years between his first appearance and his first gender swap, which is more than a 10-year gap. And so that's a bit more significant, although that's probably the weakest comparison of the three that I have. The next one is amount of incarnations. Now we've had 8 actors total play the Master on screen. That's not including the child Master in The Sound of Drums in the flashback, nor Gordon Tipple's Master in the TV movie, who we didn't even see his face and literally appeared for 3 seconds. Only one of them has been an actress. So we had 7 actors before our first actress, but 2 of those actors actually played the same incarnation, so it's even less incarnations. It's only 6 male incarnations that we've seen on screen, even though we know there's a lot more, and then 1 female incarnation. Now with the Doctor, there's 14 actors and 14 incarnations. I'm not including the Meta-Crisis 10th Doctor. And so 13 of them have been male, and then we have 1 female. And so 7 to 13 is a pretty significant difference. That's a lot more incarnations that we've seen, and therefore a lot more opportunities for us to get used to the Doctor always regenerating into a man than the Master. And finally, I think the most important difference is the actual amount of time in the show. So the Master has only appeared in 22 stories since he was first introduced in 1971, which I should note is 22 stories before he became a female. And his appearances have been very sporadic. There can be gaps of years between some of his appearances, which is not the case with the Doctor, who has appeared in 270 stories up until this point. And of course, we see him in practically every single episode, so there are no years of gaps between appearances, unless you're counting the wilderness years, which I guess you count, but that was a gap for everyone. And so I don't really consider that a valid part of this argument. But yeah, so we see the Doctor all the time. We only see the Master very sporadically. So, at least in my opinion, and as someone who does have difficulty accepting change in general, it's a lot easier to get used to a female Master than a female Doctor, because we don't see the Master nearly as often, and the Master's also not a main character of the show. It's certainly she is an important character, but not the main character. And so a drastic change like that is easier to occur to a less important character than someone like the Doctor. So I mean, I know not everyone feels that same way, but for me personally, that's what I have to say about that. The Master's a lot easier to accept than the Doctor, and because the Doctor's appeared in so many episodes as a man, I just see him as a male character. That's just the way it is, and so it's more difficult for me to get around the idea that he's now a woman. And it's not because she's a woman, it's just because of the change. And it's not even that dissimilar to other regenerations. It took me 1.5 years to finally see Capaldi as the Doctor. I mean, I saw him as the Doctor by the time his first season began, and even in his post-regeneration sequence, but I didn't really think of him as the Doctor. I still kept thinking about Matt Smith as the Doctor until after Series 8 ended. And so, I mean, I already have difficulty with change, but Peter Capaldi ended up being my favorite Doctor. And so, I mean, there's still a chance for that to happen, but as of right now, I'm just unsure about this change, and because it's more drastic than usual, it just makes it more difficult for me to understand and for me to accept. But I think it's very important to note that I am hoping that my mindset gets changed and that I can learn to accept this change and actually learn to love this Doctor. And as I mentioned in my previous video, this is nothing against Jodie Whittaker. I'm not doubting her acting ability or Chibnall's writing ability in the slightest. I'm just citing my general concerns with the female Doctor itself. And so I do believe that if Chibnall says that Jodie Whittaker is capable of the role, and then a lot of the previous Doctor's actors have given their support as well, then I believe that she is capable of playing the role. I just personally have a lot of difficulty adjusting to this change, and I'm not saying that I'm never going to change. I mean, how can I form my final opinion if I've never even seen her in the role yet? And so that's another thing that I find kind of ironic. I'm giving how I feel right now, and then people are judging me for it, even though I haven't even had a chance to form a final opinion yet. And I won't be able to do that until I see her in the role, and maybe not even until I see her in a full episode. That's actually fairly probable. And so I just think that right now, this is not my solid opinion. This is just my initial response to it. And initially, I'm not a big fan of it. I might grow to like it. Personally, I don't think I'll ever entirely grow to approve of Time Lords changing gender, but it is a canon thing, and obviously it's happened with the Doctor now. That's a fact, and that's something I have to accept. But I'm not going into this with a pessimistic or negative mindset. I want to be open to being proven wrong and to having my views changed, but that doesn't change what my views are right now. I have to wait and see how she's going to play the character, and that's what I'm going to do, and hopefully my worries can be put to rest, and she'll end up being a fantastic Doctor. But yeah, so those are my thoughts and opinions on why I personally don't really like the idea of a female Doctor. And once again, to reiterate, these are not in any way supposed to be reasons why there shouldn't be a female Doctor or why you shouldn't think there should be a female Doctor. These are just why I feel the way I do. And I know some of the points maybe aren't the strongest, but that doesn't change how I feel. I'm just trying to figure out how I can explain why I feel that way, and these are the reasons that I've come up with. So yeah, that's just the way it is. And one final important thing that I want to note is that all of these points aren't really gender specific. The only reason they're specific towards a female Doctor is because of the situation we're in. I feel really, really, absolutely confident that if the situation were flipped and we had 13 incarnations of a female Doctor that was becoming male, I would feel exactly the same way. And in fact, really, with all my arguments, I believe if you replaced female and male, if you switched them out for each other, and you told my points to somebody who didn't have any sort of context for it, didn't know that the Doctor had always been a male character or anything like that, that really wouldn't change any of the meaning of my points at all. So that's why I feel like these points are valid and reasonable, and not in any way sexist or misogynistic. I'm not discriminating towards women or being demeaning towards them. I'm just uncomfortable with the change itself. And I know that a lot of people aren't, which is great. And I hope to get to that point someday, but I ask you that if you are comfortable with the change and you're really excited about this, that you just respect my opinions and how I feel, just as I respect yours. You don't have to agree with me, just respect that that's how I feel. So now if you've listened to all of my arguments and you would like to make a comment, please write, "I'm a Who fan," before you write your comment. That's just a way for me to know if people have actually watched the whole video, because if people are going to be commenting stupid stuff without even bothering to listen to any of my arguments, I think I might just delete the comments. So if you put that in front of your comment, then I'll know that you legitimately watched at least parts of the video. At least you skimmed through it and didn't just hear, "I don't like a female Doctor," and automatically go to, "Oh, he's sexist and misogynistic. Let's burn him. He's not a real fan." That kind of stuff. I just want to try to avoid that as much as possible and have as civil of discussions as possible as I can here, which I know is difficult on YouTube, but perhaps it's possible with anyone who sees this video. I hope it is. But anyways, those are my thoughts and opinions on a female Doctor. Please put in the comments below what you think of it. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you agree with my points? Or do you disagree with my points? And do you have any arguments against the points that I've made to try and reassure me and put rest to my worries? But yeah, so anyways, that's it for now. Recommend 4 over and out, and I'll see you in my next video.